We want to thank one specific pharmaceutical company today for giving us the support to doing today's program. We do depend on pharma for all of our programs to provide us support, and today's program, and I hope that you all can give a round of applause to Celgene Pharmaceuticals for doing this. All right, let's thank them for being here. And, you know, in addition to Celgene, though, we had a lot of exhibitors here today. We had Sanofi Genzyme, Biogen, we had Genentech, EMD Serono, and Novartis. And also we had one that was a sponsor but didn't come, and that was Mallinckrodt. And so I just want to thank them all for being here as well. Okay? I want to introduce you. It's a pleasure of mine to introduce Paul Pelland. He's a former top 10 motorcycle endurance competitor from New Hampshire who now travels the country raising awareness and funds for multiple sclerosis. His goal is to document 1 million miles while sharing his inspirational story at hundreds of MS patient events and delivering keynote address and seminars for all types of audiences. He writes for both health and motorsport magazines, as well as his own blog. You can follow him on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Despite living with MS himself, over the last 5 years, he's ridden almost 400,000 miles. Okay? It's got to take a lot to do that, all right? And even this morning, I'm going to go off track here a minute. He was telling me he was trying to get to Bryce Canyon, and he woke up really early this morning, and he didn't have winter gear on, because who was expecting that coming from warmer climates, right? But he woke up this morning to find it was 14 degrees outside. Okay, and he got to the park, and he's trying to get his gloves off, and he couldn't. And he said he had to go to the bathroom, but he couldn't get his gloves off. So he just said, I got to get out of here and go find some warm climate. But he has set two world records. He's raised over $150,000 for charity. Let's all give a round of applause and a welcome to Long Haul Paul Pelland. Thank you.
I think most of us here know that multiple sclerosis is a chronic disease affecting the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord. All of us, however, will have a unique and different course of the disease. My MS symptoms are mostly cognitive, short-term memory loss, mental fatigue, multitasking, impaired planning, decision-making, and short-term memory loss. Did I say that one yet? Despite the hours and hours that I spent preparing this presentation, I have absolutely no idea what slide comes next. But thanks to technology, we have lots of ways to help us out, right? As long as we remember how to use them. I also experienced numbness, tingling, burning sensations, and loss of strength issues. Heat is a big enemy of mine. Trying to get messages across the damaged circuits in my brain gets really difficult whenever I get overheated or my temperature rises even slightly. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Well, why are you in Las Vegas? I'm just asking. That's what air conditioning's for, right? And ice, lots of ice. The hardest part of having multiple sclerosis for me is not being able to trust my own body on a regular basis and not knowing where or when the disease will strike next. Lately, I've had to deal with a lying, cheating, good-for-nothing bladder. And that's been real fun, especially traveling on the motorcycle with all my riding gear on. When I was first diagnosed, it was very clear to me that all the evidence, the importance of getting on treatment as soon as possible to help slow down the progression of the disease. And I've been on disease-modifying therapy now for 14 years. I also started taking better care of myself by exercising regularly and watching what I eat, trying to be healthier. Most importantly, I've discovered that by continuing to do what I love, following my passion of riding every single day, I've been able to keep this disease from controlling my life. please remember, MS is not who you are. If you look MS up in the dictionary, I guarantee you won't see my picture. So make sure your picture never makes it there either. Before getting diagnosed, I was a top long-distance motorcycle competitor, and I rode in some of the toughest motorcycle competitions in the country. During what became my last competition, I experienced weakness, loss of dexterity in my hands, confusion, and memory loss. I retired from competing, and I pretty much gave up riding motorcycles altogether. I tossed away my dreams, my plans for the future, and I prepared for the absolute worst. Well, it never came, so I stopped waiting for it. 6 years ago, well, actually 7 years ago now, I realized although I could never compete in motorcycle endurance competitions, I could still ride a motorcycle across the country, and that I'd thrown in the towel a bit too early on a sport that I really loved. So within a few months, I recalculated my entire life's road and purpose, and I am now on an incredible adventure, riding every day possible, following my passions, while helping others recalculate their road as well. Unfortunately, tonight's presentation has absolutely nothing to do with anything I've said so far. Back in 2001, I was not yet experiencing any signs or symptoms of multiple sclerosis, but I rode a motorcycle that did. Lemons and Long Shots is the story of my experiences entering the 2001 Iron Butt Rally. It took me over a decade to realize how entering the world's toughest motorcycle competition on quite possibly the world's most unreliable motorcycle was frightfully similar to the everyday challenges brought on by the unpredictable symptoms of multiple sclerosis. My struggle to overcome impossible challenges over 11 unforgettable days helped shape who I am and continues and taught me that if my desire and willpower is strong enough, there's nothing this disease can stop me from attempting. I hope my journey inspires you to return to or find a new passion in your life and to make that passion more important than your disease. Look beyond the obstacles in the road, lean hard into the wind, and never give up on your hopes and dreams. Has anyone ever heard of the Iron Butt Rally? One. All right. Very good. Oh, she just wants her dessert. So, all right. The Iron Butt Rally, it's called the world's toughest motorcycle competition. It's held every other year. It's 11 days long, and the average rider will ride 11,000 miles. Points are accumulated by reaching optional bonus points, picked from hundreds of possibilities. It's not a race. It's like a scavenger hunt on steroids. And we all know what steroids are. So my name was not originally drawn for the 2001 event, but I sent a letter begging to ride the biggest piece of crap motorcycle ever built if they would just let me in the rally. I told them I would ride a Russian-made motorcycle called a Ural. Anybody ever hear of a Ural? Yes, probably not. Knowing how unreliable and poorly made these motorcycles were, the organizers first replied they thought I was an idiot. But my entry was accepted. At this point, not only did I not own a Ural motorcycle, I had not even ever seen one in person. I was excited, so I wrote the bike's manufacturer to see if they wanted to sponsor me. The company responded with a letter from the president that said, "Sorry, Paul, but no one here in our office thinks our bike could actually finish the event." Talk about red flags. So I bought my own used Ural. I hot rodded the engine, and I entered it in a 36-hour endurance event as sort of a test before the big event. And about halfway through the rally, the motor decided to weld itself useless. So now I sent a second request urgently, begging Ural America for help. And they answered in a big way. They agreed to officially sponsor me, but I just couldn't tell anyone. Talk about confidence in your own product. They delivered the secret weapon a few weeks before the 2001 Iron Butt Rally would start. I was going to be riding the very first Ural motorcycle registered in the United States with a new, redesigned 750cc engine. Now, I had to sign all these non-disclosure agreements and sign things because this was the first change in design for this motorcycle since Moses rode one to the Red Sea to part the water. It was a big secret. The bike had electric start and electronic ignition. So the Iron Butt Rally started and finished in Alabama. It had 3 checkpoints: California, Washington, and Maine. On a map, it was just like a giant rectangle. How hard could it be, I thought?
At the Ramada Inn in Huntsville, Alabama, the motorcycle people have taken over, and not just any motorcycle people. Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Despain. Welcome to Bike Week. Let me show you some motorcycles here.
I am riding a 2001 Ural.
How do other people react when they hear that news?
Well, I get quite a bit of ribbing, but I give it right back so I can take it. And I've put a lot of miles on Urals, and things go wrong, I know what to do to fix it, and I have every intention of finishing the rally.
He just laughed at me. He just laughed right in my face. So yes, I was laughed at for my choice of motorcycles, and some riders were actually upset that I was wasting a coveted spot that a real rider with a real chance of finishing could have had. Sometimes we need to remind people it's not the bike, or in the case of when you live with multiple sclerosis, it's not our bodies, but the rider, the person, and our spirit that will eventually get us over the finish line. If you notice, somebody Sharpied in an IN in the middle of my plate, so it says urinal. I know who did that too. My bike was well prepared. I had these huge saddlebags to fit all the spare parts and tools that I thought I might need. A custom seat. I had a bigger windshield and extra driving lights, extra fuel tank, a CB radio, radar detector, a GPS. I was clearly ready to ride the world's toughest motorcycle competition, right? I thought so. The night before the start, the riders get their bonus packets containing hundreds of possible options. Each rider's goal is to plan their own route, maximizing the points and minimizing the amount of time and miles on the bike. You can taste the anxiety the morning of the start. After all, some of us have been planning this ride for years. My strategy, which I proudly proclaim to anyone who would listen, is I was going to ride as freaking fast as I could, so when I broke down, I'd have more time to fix it. I was the only one who thought I had any chance at all of reaching even the first checkpoint. And so the 11-day event, the adventure of a lifetime, begins. Most riders were having an excellent first day, collecting bonuses by taking a photo with their special rider flags, whereas for me, in West Memphis, Arkansas, and about 250 miles from the start, my Ural's engine self-destructed. I frantically called Ural America for help. Curiously, they were not very surprised. We found a Ural dealer in Tennessee who didn't have any bikes for sale, but he had his own personal Ural motorcycle, and he agreed to let me borrow his motor. Afraid to close my eyes during a 3-hour scary tow ride with an insane driver, I slept on the garage floor while this gentleman removed the diseased motor and swapped his own engine into my frame in the middle of the night. I was extremely grateful, and better yet, I was back in the rally. I left the garage like a bat out of hell. Probably not a very good idea. My bike now had a 1928 design 650cc motor without electric start. I soon realized the blinker and the brake lights weren't working. I kept waiting for the engine to warm up, but apparently crappy was how this engine was supposed to run. After 2 hours, I stopped to check on the rear lights, and after a quick rest, the engine refused to start. I checked everything, remembering the 4 strokes of a 4-cycle internal combustion engine: compression, power, and intake, and exhaust. This piece of recycled tank turret, however, had its own version: retake stroke, depression stroke, powerless stroke, and exhausted stroke. I alternated 4 hours of kicking and swearing with resting and praying before it haphazardly coughed to life. And I was on the road again, heading to Pomona, and I was going to prove everybody wrong. That was until my morning freeway crash in Arkansas. The front end had developed a bit of a crunchy wobble, and a series of dips in the road started an oscillating shimmy that turned into a full-fledged tank slapper. I knew I was in trouble when I looked to my left and I saw my own butt. I slid down the highway just behind my bike, watching these bright, colorful sparks, unlike any of those plastic Japanese bikes could create. After I stopped rolling, I checked myself over a bit, and I was in one piece, but the bike, the windshield was cracked in half, the brake levers were bent, both of the air cleaners were nowhere to be found. There was a 3-inch hole in the side of the engine that had leaked oil all over the road. And there was damage to the saddlebags, the brake lights, blinkers, driving lights. What a mess. I had made it through a blown engine, a scary tow ride, an engine transplant, electrical problems, 4 hours of just trying to start the bike, and now a crash. It was really hard to believe it was just 24 hours since the 11-day event had begun. I was exhausted, bruised, embarrassed, and pedo that this piece of crap machine couldn't even roll in a straight line without falling apart. Maybe it's just me, but is this adventure or misadventure starting to sound a little bit like what it's like to live life with multiple sclerosis? I had given it all I had, but my iron butt rally was over. After I explained what had happened to the Arkansas State Trooper who had stopped to see what had happened, he asked me what I was going to do about it. And I just said, "What?" He says, "Why don't you see if you can fix it up and continue on your ride?" The thought had not occurred to me. I got out my JB Weld and duct tape, epoxy, and the officer patiently waited while I patched my bike back together. I told him I needed oil. And he said, "Well, let me see what I can do." He went back to his patrol car to see if a tow truck would bring us some oil up on the highway. When he returned, he said, "They wanted too much money." And I said, "No, you don't understand. I don't care what it costs, you know." He said, No, don't worry." He says, "I called my wife at home. She's going to go to the store, get 2 quarts of 2050 oil, and meet us up here on the highway." As I travel the country alone, I've benefited from the generosity from strangers just like this many, many times. The officer's encouragement to continue and his wife's selfless act of kindness is not as rare as this world would have us believe. Asking for help or accepting help from friends, family, or strangers is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. Please don't be afraid to ask for help when your MS causes you to stumble or crash. Anyway, back to my story. So I stopped at the first exit to check myself over and, quite frankly, changed my dirty underwear. I called into rally headquarters to report that I was back in the rally again. And the Days 2 official rally report said, "Team Lazarus rides again." This sticker, which was appropriately placed by a fellow rider a few days before the rally, was starting to become my inspiration. No wimps. Maybe we should get a sticker like this for those MS days, right? Tuesday afternoon, I was experiencing this intermittent problem. The engine would suddenly lose power, but when I looked over to try to figure out what was going on, it would start running great again. It happened 3 or 4 times before I finally realized my pant leg was getting sucked into one of the open carburetors. Sort of reminds me how we're always quick to blame MS for every one of our aches and pains we experience, right? Early the next morning, somewhere in New Mexico, the headlight, once as bright as a lit cigarette, began to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. I pulled off the first exit and began checking over the wiring and connections. I found a broken stud in the back of the alternator, but I wasn't worried because I was carrying a spare alternator. Unfortunately, the spare alternator was for the 750 motor and did not fit the 650 motor. Well, that alternator did fit somewhere in a dumpster. After a few dents in the tank, some cursing, an act of contrition, I was able to repair the alternator. The bike was so dead, however, it wouldn't start. It wouldn't even kickstart. So I looked off in the distance and I could see that the on-ramp was down a slight hill. And I knew that if I had one shot to try to push start this bike. I rolled it down the hill. I popped the clutch at the right moment. The bike started up and vroom, I was back on the road again. Things were fairly normal until Wednesday afternoon. And I was 150 miles in 5 hours before the first checkpoint closed. I was in the Mojave Desert in August, and it was 110 degrees. Everybody here like the heat? No, we already established that. Well, my bike didn't like the heat either. One of the 2 cylinders calls it quits. I continued limping along at about 25 miles an hour until I reached the hill. The bike refused to go another inch and dies. I was completely fried. The bike was totally fried. The California Highway Patrol officer who stopped was not really friendly or willing to let me fiddle with on the side of the road. I didn't even bother to ask him to call his wife. Against my will, we were towed into Barstow, California. You've heard of that, haven't you? Wednesday evening, I did all I could to fix the bike, but I finally conceded I would not make the Pomona checkpoint. I had been through so much, and I was so close, but my brain was fried. I was overheated, angry, and now I was extremely depressed. I was a failure. I called into the checkpoint reporting that I was safe, but I would not make it in time. I was out of the event. And that's when the rally staff reminded me of a rule that I could actually miss one checkpoint. As long as I still went there, got a gas receipt to prove I was there, and didn't miss any of the other 3 checkpoints. However, Paul, he said, you'll have to forfeit all your bonus points from this leg. Bonus points, I said? What the heck were those? The call gave me a surge of renewed energy and hope, and I eventually found a stripped rocker arm shaft. I was able to take 2 nuts and jam them together to get it to work. The bike started right up, and both of us were running on all cylinders once again. So I went to Pomona and got my gas receipt. I got to experience the Santa Monica Boulevard freeway traffic during morning hour, rush hour, with no brake lights and no blinkers. It was quite the experience. I only remember one breakdown on the way to Sunnyside, Washington, and I was able to actually fix it, a loose plug wire, without even slowing down. I was getting pretty good at this. I fell asleep on a soft patch of parking lot asphalt, and waking up the next morning, I could hardly believe I had made it all the way to checkpoint 2. I got scored, and besides the riders that were out of the rally, I was in last place in the points. Most of the riders were amazed to see me. They had heard some rumors that I was having some problems. The Ural factory team was actually there in Washington meeting me for an oil change. But now they were actually installing the only other 750cc engine, the bigger engine, into my bike. So my bike was now given its 3rd engine, a full service, and a new steering head bearing, which apparently had fallen out, causing my crash in Arkansas. My electrical wiring was repaired, and heck, it was like I had a brand new old bike again. And I had been given a second chance at a good finish. Ever feel like you have superpowers after getting a dose of steroids? That's how I felt. I looked over the new bonus lists, and I expressed to the Ural team as well as the rally staff that I was thinking about going to Alaska for a couple of the big bonus points on this leg. I was strongly encouraged not to go to Alaska. And in fact, I was actually threatened. They said if I tried to go to Alaska and I failed, they would never let me in the Iron Butt Rally ever again. They said, Paul, you don't understand. More people are following you than the guys winning the rally. And he added kind of quietly, some of us think you might actually make it. Things were going pretty good the next day until I heard this jingling sound coming from the left side of the motor. It sounded like keys dangling, but I figured I better pull over and check it out. So somewhere in a dirt parking lot in Rock Springs, Wyoming, I pulled off the highway to see what was going on. At this point, this routine was getting pretty old. I found a lot of aluminum shavings in the valve cover. One of the engine push rods seemed to be bent. It was spinning kind of in an oblong orbit. So I called and explained what I had discovered to Golden Hands Alex, who was the head Russian mechanic, who instructed me, remove push rod, bang straight on rock with hammer. So I removed this bent push rod only to find it wasn't bent. The steel cap had broken off the aluminum shaft. The push rod was in two impossible pieces. Now, a push rod is kind of an important internal part of an engine. It moves up and down and opens the valves, letting in the gas and the air so that the engine can spark and blow it up and makes the engine run. It's kind of important. So I called back the #1 top Russian factory expert technician, who simply said, no problem. Fine metal, make push rod. I'm in a dirt parking lot. John Quinones asked, what would you do, right? Well, I did have quite a bit of tools and spare parts with me, but I didn't have any spare push rods for a 750 motor. I knew duct tape wasn't going to work. So I decided to JB Weld epoxy it back together. So I let the glue harden a bit, and I put the push rod back in the engine, and I started the bike up, and it was running on both cylinders, and I took off, trying to be real gentle on the throttle. Incredibly, I made it 50 miles before, somewhere near Rawlins, Wyoming, the pasted together push rod failed. Once again, I was putting along at 25 miles an hour, running on one cylinder. The engine was thumping, and the rhythm began to take on a curious verse. Go home, 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 go home. This was a pivotal moment. I stood up on the foot pegs, I opened up my helmet visor, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, I will not go home! I will not give up, you commie bastard! And I took out my grease pencil and I wrote across my windshield, I will not give up. And I vowed no matter what, I was going to finish this event. I just needed a better plan. I caressed my injured donkey into Rawlins, Wyoming, where I found a hardware store, and in about 5 minutes, I found the solution to my problem. I purchased a couple of long, hardened drill bits, and with a grinder that I had spotted in the back room, I forged myself a couple of brand new Ural push rods. Fine metal, make push rod. Who says I never follow factory recommended maintenance procedures? The drill bit push rod worked, and the bike actually ran better than ever before. And I was back on the road and on my way to the third checkpoint. Meanwhile, there were actual riders trying to get the big bonuses and trying to win the rally. I made it to the checkpoint in Maine, and I retrieved a care package that I had mailed there a few weeks earlier. The box reads, this package is for the guy riding the biggest piece of crap in the Iron Bike Rally. You know, my whole life I found laughing and joking, even at my own expense, to be powerful medicine. Today, living with MS symptoms and deficits is no different. I often make fun of my bad memory, bladder, when I trip or get lost in a parking lot and need help. For me, joking gives the disease less power over me. Here's a picture of my bike's windshield with my words of encouragement from Wyoming. It also has normal stuff like check the tire pressure, check your oil, check your push rod. Normal stuff, you know. Somebody thought it was time I trade in my bike. With the exception of another charging system failure and alternator repair, I had a rather uneventful 1,300-mile ride to the finish in Madison, Alabama. Of 114 riders that started the 2001 Iron Butt Rally, 93 made it to the finish line. I may have come in 86th place, but I did indeed finish the world's toughest motorcycle competition.
Thank you.
In 11 days, I had ridden the motorcycle, never intended for anything even remotely close to what I did to it. I rode a motorcycle in an event where other riders thought I was wasted a valuable entry spot, and even the organizers listed me in the hopeless class. I crossed the finish line on a bike whose own manufacturer said wouldn't make it. I will be forever grateful for taking the risk. The impossible 1,000,000 to 1 odds of finishing this event on such an antiquated motorcycle. This life-altering experience helped shape who I am and continues to give me strength to believe in myself in the most difficult and trying times. Inside of every one of you here today is that same power and ability to navigate around your MS obstacles or challenges and to continue down the road to a wonderful and fulfilling life. Having a brain riddled with holes, having a physical or mental challenge, or riding a piece of crap motorcycle should never confine or define who we are. I know we all have different MS symptoms, and my course of the disease has been quite manageable compared to others. I certainly don't expect everyone in this room to run out and buy a motorcycle and ride it all over creation. But I do know some of you were passionate about something at some time. And maybe that passion was put aside after getting diagnosed. So I challenge you to revisit that activity or find a related activity. Look at it from a whole new angle. Get some help from assistive technology or just a different set of eyes. And I bet you might just see something that you can get all excited about as well. There are millions of miles of roads on this earth, each and every one of them intersected with crossroads, representing different paths. And therefore, not all of us are supposed to take the fastest route. Slow down, recalculate, detour, wander, or shift, because a roundabout can still get you to your goal. And believe me, sometimes that ride, that journey, that side trip adventure will become much more important than your destination. And please remember, you do not have to come in first place to still be a winner.
Thank you, Paul. If anybody has any questions for Paul, this would be the greatest time to ask, all right?
Or tomorrow.
Well, he'll be back on the road tomorrow. He actually has to get to a museum that honored a bike of his. Which bike?
The first bike that I started my million on, I set a world record with it. And that bike is on display at Barber Motorsports Museum in Birmingham, Alabama. So I have to be there Friday night. I think it's the only bike ever donated to the museum that still had original payments on it. I tend to wear stuff out.
So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hands. Let me get to you. Great.
If the Ural was really not such a good motorcycle, I don't understand why you were determined to use it.
Sure. Well, so the Iron Butt Rally, they usually let in about 100 riders, and there's a drawing. So you have to kind of qualify, and then when you send in your entry, it goes in a bucket. And I was like 250 on the waiting list to get in. So 250 people have to, 100 people have to say no, then another 250, and then before I was in. But I knew that the association would let in antiques or weird bikes, or like if you're famous, you could get into the rally. They save some spots. So right off the bat, I just said, what's the dumbest thing that anybody could try to enter on? And I thought that they might say yes, and they did. So that's why. I didn't say I make a lot of smart decisions, but.
Can I say it? Okay. So I don't really have a question, but it's very admirable that you stuck to it and you didn't allow yourself to get stuck and you finished your goal.
That's great. That's a great response.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, during the rally, I was just thinking it's a long walk home. I just kept saying it's a long walk home.
Anybody else? There we go.
Obviously, I'm sorry. With your MS, the vibration of the bike, it didn't obviously bother you.
No, I don't. I mean, the bike I'm riding doesn't have a lot of vibration, but I do pretty good on the bike. Most of my stuff is cognitive, so like leaving this parking lot, you'll see me do 3 or 4 circles. I have 3 GPS going at the same time, and I don't trust any of them. They're all lying to me. I have some issues sometimes with that stuff, and then if I get overheated, it becomes an issue. I can start to have weakness in my legs and things, and recognizing those symbols when to get off the road and go stick my head in an ice cooler or something for an hour. Yeah, but I don't have too much issues with vibration. Yeah.
Sideways, left.
Now I can ask about dessert.
I just wanted to say I agree with this gentleman right here. You showed so much courage. And I know somewhere you had a little bit of divine intervention going for you. All right.
There was no collusion, I can say that.
All right,
And
you
no,
good?
I don't ride a Ural now. I'm not even allowed in Russia anymore. Once they thought it was great. They took the bike back right after the ride. I say the KGB confiscated it, but anyway, they met me in a truck stop, took the bike from me, and I've never seen it again. At first, I heard it was in a museum in Russia, and then I think when my story came out about all the breakdowns, they weren't so proud of it anymore, and yeah, I'm not allowed anywhere on that continent.
All right, anybody else? If not, let's thank Paul, all right?
Thank you.
Now, again, I want to thank Celgene for providing us the funding to do today's program. Again, we do hope that we can get back here to the Las Vegas area another time. We do hope that you all will be there. We'll definitely find an environment that we could get double the amount of people in there, okay? And without you all having to sit on top of each other. And we do hope that you'll come back again, all right? Just remember MSViews and News.